as well as, and we'll link it in with GB News, and they're just general diarrhea of entertainment because they're not a news organisation.
They're trying to push for a voting on the what is it, what's the awards they're going for?
No one watches
TV's programme of the year.
Every year the TV industry has its own award ceremony, but my name has made it to the list of runners and riders, and it's a public vote. Can you imagine the shock, the outrage, the anger if I was to beat the established industry now?
I think they're going for like best news program, which is kind of funny considering they're not classed as news under Ofcom rules. Which is why they get away with so much stuff.
I think Ofcom came out and said something about that as well, didn't they? They had to make a statement as to why they class them as entertainment and not news.
But that will depend on the overall programme. Who else is there?
But that's not what your rules say. Your rules say no politician may be used as an interviewer. They are interviewing
on news programmes.
Yes.
Yes, and so that's the rule that would need to be.
So that breaches your rules.
Here. No, I can't say without knowing the specifics of this programme. I'm very happy to follow up on it if you'd.
Sorry, I really.
If you'd like us to, but
I would like you to.
That will be the question: is whether or not it's a news programme or whether or not it is a wider opinion and current affairs show.
It is a news. It is a news programme. Obviously, if two MPs are interviewing on a news channel a Tory Chancellor about the news, that is a news interview.
Well, I think probably we need to get back to you on the detail of exactly what constitutes, in this context, a news programme or a broader current affairs programme. There are quite a lot of examples of where former and serving politicians do present shows, and provided that they make sure that there's a range of opinions represented on those shows, that is compliant with the broadcasting code. But it does depend on the specifics of the show. That's
not what your rules say. I've just read out your rules. Esther and Phil are not interviewing the Chancellor about cooking or what he thinks about sport. They are interviewing him, the Treasury says, about the budget. It clearly breaches your rules. There's no ambiguity about that.
Well, I'm very happy to come back on that and on the specifics. Okay. If the programme's already been broadcast, then...
Good. Well, I look forward to hearing about that, because I think that's an unambiguous breach of the rules, and it's part of the creeping politicisation of news channels, as the chair said, the kind of Americanisation that we're seeing. And we've also got Nadia.
Because I think they suggested it was something like it was clear that they were an entertainment programme. It was like, it's got the word fucking news in the title. Wait, shouldn't we all be like applying to this as well? Telling our viewers to vote the same.
Well, yeah, I think we should tell them to vote against GB News.
Amazing! The Sunday roast became the first, won the prize. That'd be amazing. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Sunday roast. We have another two wonderful guests with us today. Let's start with Peter. Peter, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yes, I'm Peter Packham. I am the instigator, I think is probably the right word, of the petition we call on the government to hold a public inquiry into the impact of Brexit. I'm also, I run the Leads for Europe legendary Facebook page. I'm also a member of the National Council of the European Movement, and I would describe myself as an activist. In other words, I do things.
Fantastic. Ollie, once again, back on the show. For anyone who's not familiar with you, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
I know. I'm for once, I'm actually wearing a bowler hat. So yes, I'm Ollie. I'm run my sort of YouTube channel called Bowlerhat Man. We talk about sort of politics. As you can see, proud Yorkshire. Like I say, we're both representing sort of the Yorkshire area today, me and Pete. So yeah, certainly like to sort of fly that Yorkshire flag and sort of show my Yorkshire colours, as we say. I'm always a Yorkshireman before an Englishman, as they say.
Fantastic. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about yourself for anyone who's new to the show?
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a historian and I run my own YouTube channel called Political X, and my magnificent co-host Max.
My name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel where I talk about British politics and Brexit in particular. Alex, what's our first topic for today?
I actually got a question for the Yorkshireman. You have the expression "our kid." What's the plural?
I'm actually from Kent.
Yeah. I suppose it'd be now than our lad, or now than our son, or maybe who knows?
Yeah.
We'd have to. Well, don't worry. Next time you're up north, we'll take you up Ginnell. we'll take you to the pub. We'll have a pint of gills, and it'll be great fun. It'll be all gravy.
I think you just leave off the arcade. It just be hey up.
Hey up.
Lee Anderson uses it a lot. I don't know if he's actually authentic or not.
Yeah,
anything or in Yorkshire.
Yeah,
in any way.
I think he's north. Is he North Yorkshire?
Ashfield,
I can't remember now.
I thought it's Nottingham, isn't he?
Yeah, the town of Brian Clough. I keep bringing it up. Although, as a Leeds supporter or any Leeds supporter that may be watching, I don't think that bears any weight whatsoever, considering we're slightly orientating ourselves to the north today. We've got a serious topic though to talk about, not about translating Yorkshire dialect and language. Brexit inquiry. Peter, would you like to kick us off? How on earth did you come up with the idea for this inquiry?
Yeah, it really came about sort of after the National Rejoin March. Now, where the idea actually came from was listening to James O'Brien one morning, and he had one of his infrequent phone-ins about Brexit. And I think the first caller was a guy whose name I don't know, but who tweets under the handle of Loz Argyle. He's from Plymouth. And I just happened to heard him say, I think what we ought to have is a public inquiry into Brexit and find out the truth. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. I didn't really think that much of it, but after the National Rejoin March, I thought, well, there's really a need to try and move things on, to try and build on the momentum, because I think that was one of the things we didn't do back in 2019 with the People's Vote marches. We sort of had the march and then nothing happened. And then also looking at sort of the polling, where the polling was starting to switch very much in people saying it was a mistake to leave the EU, that people were in favour of rejoining the EU. But I think the most telling point was that Leavers were starting to say, we regret this, and sort of anecdotally on Twitter and things, you were seeing Leavers saying, well, this isn't the Brexit I voted for. This wasn't supposed to happen. So in a meeting with Leeds for Europe, we had a discussion about this, and I made the suggestion, well, why don't we organise a petition on the government's website? Because it's something for us as a movement to focus on, but it's also something, because we're not asking to rejoin the EU, or we're not complaining about the trading relationship with the EU. It's about finding out, well, what has actually happened. So surely everybody should be interested. Surely Leavers should be interested in that. I think Chris Gray said, if you're not calling for, or if you're against an inquiry into Brexit, then that's tantamount to admitting there are problems with it. So it was really around the sort of the basis of we want to know the truth. The public has a right to know, because we've had, if you include sort of the referendum campaign, we've had sort of 7-8 years of not being told the truth. Everything is spun, and still you're seeing it. And when you see on GB News Jacob Rees-Mogg interviewing Bill Cash about Brexit, you think, my God, what the hell's going on here? So really, it was set up as a campaign to try and establish the truth, because we felt, we have a right to know. It kind of moved on from that, because what we became aware of was, if we were really going to get MP support, if we got a debate in Parliament, we were going to have to be a bit more neutral. So we set up a pop-up campaign, the Brexit Inquiry campaign, or as its full title is, the National Campaign for an Inquiry into the Consequences of Brexit, which trips off the tongue nicely. But the idea of that was that didn't have a rejoin message. That was neutral. That was about the public have a right to know. These are all the questions we'd like asking. So that's really sort of where it grew up from, or where it came about from.
Can I just say I just want to say congratulations to Peter for achieving that, because years ago I wouldn't have believed it would have been possible because of the way Parliament operates, and with the Tories having a massive majority. But I saw some. I didn't see the entire inquiry, but I saw a lot of some of the speeches from it, and they were really, really interesting things that were said. And it was also interesting from the point of view that I didn't see many Brexiteer. Like, there were a number of Tory MPs who turned up for it, but we didn't see Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, unfortunately. The people who were promoting Brexit from the beginning, why didn't they turn up to defend Brexit? We saw a few sort of nobodies do that instead.
Yeah, there was only really 2 pro-Brexit people, I think.
And I don't even remember their names. Yeah.
Leo something.
Yeah,
Leo
one was a lord.
Yeah, Leo Doherty was the government minister who was there to... he had to be there. He was replying on behalf of the government.
The government really does not believe that it would be appropriate to hold an inquiry into the impact of Brexit.
So, I mean, I was actually at the debate. I was sat in the, they call it a strangers gallery. It was a sort of cordoned off area at the back of the hall. And I have to say, he spent most of the debate with his head in his hands like this, because he didn't look as if he wanted to be. The one you're talking about is Adam Holloway.
Holloway, yeah.
And funnily enough, I was looking at an older edition this morning of Sunday Roast just to get an idea of sort of the format. And you were saying you couldn't remember who he was. It was Adam Holloway, and he did. He just got up, first of all, started speaking about...
When 65% of the people in my constituency, Gravesham, voted in the 2015 referendum, they cast their votes in favour of leaving the EU. And they did so in the expectation that their views would be respected and in the hope that the government would have the guts to make a success of it. In these ambitions, my constituents have not been well served. Their clear instructions to us here in Parliament were not respected. For years, the government, with a collusion of the civil service, treated Brexit as a gigantic strategic mistake by the people of the United Kingdom, and they saw their role of one of damage limitation.
The 65% of his constituents who voted Brexit, and they've been let down because this government, in collusion with the civil service, have thwarted all. It just came out. It was just absolute nonsense. And when he'd finished, he left the room. There was one other person who supported Brexit, and I think it was Jim Stannard. I think, but I think he was a DUP member. Despite the fact they had microphones, he was stood directly in front of me. I was right behind him. His accent was impenetrable. I just couldn't make out what he was saying. But the interesting, I thought, both were in support of Brexit. But then, as their argument went on, they seemed to be making arguments for an inquiry because they were complaining about things that have gone wrong. Well, that's what an inquiry would find out. Also, I think it was disappointing that only the 2 Brexit supporters came along to the debate. And in fact, since the debate, I've been invited the government have commissioned some academics at Leeds University to do a study into how to make the petitions more engaging and how to get more people to submit petitions and more people to sign them. And I'm going to make the point that the government needs to take them more seriously, because in our case, nobody turned up apart from the minister. ordinary MPs, if they want people to engage more with the petitions, they need to take it more seriously at the debate stage. Up to the debate, I couldn't fault them for the processes they went through, but actually at the debates, I think that's a major reason why there's a lot of cynicism amongst people about these petitions and then the debates.
Do you think if it had been a petition to have a harder Brexit, then more people would have turned up?
I don't know, because there's another part to it, and that is that I think particularly over Brexit, the party leaders are very carefully managing what their MPs say. But yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's no doubt there certainly would have been more. I mean, the people like Rees-Mogg and people like would have turned up for that, but you know.
But obviously, there's no petition for that because no one's calling for a harder Brexit, which is also fascinating in itself. Ollie, what do you want to say?
I had to laugh at one point there because she said, "Oh yeah, about very, very moderating what their party is saying," and we've just had Tobias Ellwood. I believe it was Preston. I think he was on ITV. Came out and said,
"All politicians need to read the room. This is the generation that's coming forward to saying we're not accepting this model of Brexit." And no political party is really willing to embrace this. You're dismissing the single market. I remember when we had this debate on Brexit, it was Dan Hannan, it was Nigel Farage, it was David Frost, and Boris Johnson all said staying in the single market was part of the deal. That was what they said during the referendum itself, that departing the European Union meant that we could stay in. We ended up with this silly debate which got polarised, and no one is recognising the fact that this is costing our nation 4% of our GDP every year. And if you want more money to pay for nurses, you want more money for all these other things we want to do, we need to be braver about recognising where the nation wants us as politicians to actually go.
Is there any chance that you're...
It's just like, where are the rest of the Conservatives leading that charge? He's currently very much one voice in the wilderness. But I think you've seen a lot of people very recently say, potentially if the Tories end up in opposition, with a lot of the hard Brexiteers looking like losing their seats the next opposition, that may be a real possibility. I mean, it may seem nonsense to say, but it could happen. If they want to get back in and they view it as campaigning to rejoin the single market customs union, Tobias Ellwood might be maybe the first of many to do so.
I think after the next election, when the Tories are kicked out, they're going to go in there are two possible directions they can go to. They can either go to the far right, the Kimi Badenoch route and Suella Braverman route, or they could go the Tobias Ellwood route, where they become more moderate and pro-European. So, if they lose a lot of MPs at the next election, the new batch could be younger people, could be more pro-European people coming back to the party. We'll have to see.
That's I think the potential future of the Conservative Party maybe should be like a post. We'll have like maybe after the general election, we should have like a morning after. or maybe we can do like an up all night and watch the general election together. Well, that'll be fun. But yeah, I think the future of the Conservative Party is a very, very interesting conversation. I think sort of something I do regular on my channel is I look at Conservative Home, because it is very, very influential when it comes to sort of the Conservative Party. And they were predicting that the election and the next Prime Minister was going to be Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. And when I was looking at those polls and doing my walk in the fields saying that, it's going to be Rishi and Liz, a lot of people in my chat saying, no, it's not going to be them. It's not going to be them. I'm like, so it's very influential. I mean, Ben Wallace at the moment on there, he's a very popular boy, Ben Wallace, according to the Conservatives at the moment on there. But
not particularly great in military terms, though.
Oh yeah, probably not.
Is just a complete and utter mess, along with most of what appears to be most of our military operations at the moment. Have just gone to absolute. And he's in charge of that.
Yeah. So
it's funny. It's as you said. He seems to have like a bit of a shine to him that he's okay. But if you actually look at what he's meant to have done over that period, a lot of that stuff, I'm pretty sure a lot of that stuff about 10 years ago would have got a lot of them sacked. But again, we live in this new era where anyone can get away with it. Well, there's one group that we did not mention that they could also end up being, and that's the batshit crazy group, and joining an alliance like Bridgend just did. Is it Alliance with Lawrence Fox?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's just joined in there. So I think Alliance now have an MP in Parliament, although I don't see that lasting very long.
Was it Reform Party? No, not Reform.
No,
Reclaim.
it's not Reform.
Reclaim.
Reclaim.
So now they have an MP.
Yeah.
For how long remains to be seen. But
something else I wanted to sort of get back to what Peter was saying about getting sort of the MPs to take it seriously. I think that is a big effort to get MPs to take these types of petitions seriously, and it's, I think, how we go about doing that, because I knew at the end of your sort of campaign you had the big sort of send the Davis downside dossier, which I think was organised by sort of the bylines to get MPs involved. And I think that in future, something I would say is that there is part of that website where you can actually see where people are signing up to. You can see the numbers by constituency, how many people are signing up to that. And I think that should be something, so I don't know if it is at the moment, but it'd be interesting to sort of ask that question. How many MPs can actually see that or get notification that this is being signed up to? I contacted Dan Jarvis. I wanted Dan Jarvis to be at that meeting. And I think that's something else. Certainly, if you sort of look at running out any of these sort of future campaigns or these things, targeting MPs, getting people to write to your MP saying, I want you to be at this, debate. I think that is important, because not enough people, as I always say, it's not enough people write to their MPs. And it has easily one of the biggest effects on MPs, because they've sort of got to, in a way, respond. And I think it was is it change.org? I can't remember if it's change.org or it might be the other big petition website that actually part of it sends your petition to your MP as well. And in the past, whenever I've signed up to some of those petitions, I've actually got written responses from Dan Jarvis from me signing these petitions that initially I wasn't expecting.
Oh, wow.
But it's just part of the thing to say, oh, okay, now Dan Jarvis knows. He's had to sort of, write a response to me. So I think that is something we should look at. And to be honest, I've got a pitch for you, Peter. I've got a pitch for your next potential one. So at the moment, there is certainly in our politics, when you look at other countries outside the EU, there is a big part of politics which involves trade deals. Trade deals are big political games and big political things in other countries, but we haven't experienced that yet because we've been in the EU. And now my boy Grant Shapps is currently organizing potentially a rebellion on the Canada and Mexico trade deals.
Wow.
Why?
So if we could,
why?
If we could sort of tap into that and go, oh, you're concerned about these trade deals. Well, remember the big promise of Brexit that we'd get all this say about all these trade deals, that this would be, parliamentary, sovereignty. But we've had no say over the Australian deal. We've had no say over the New Zealand trade deal. We've had no say over joining the Pacific Partnership. I do think that is a potential to look at for the next sort of big petition, sort of saying, hey, you're signing all these trade deals, but there hasn't been parliamentary scrutiny. It's what can we do if it's a bad deal? What can we do, or potentially a future government do, sort of in and around those sort of trade deals? I think there's a lot to be done there, and I think sort of trying to tag MPs as well into it would be a fantastic movement, because if you look at sort of Barnsley, a lot of these big businesses do and are going to be threatened by all these cheap imports that will be coming from Mexico, Canada. We've seen, again, Grant Shapps, heavily farmer community that he comes from. His movement is being backed by the farmers in his constituency saying these trade deals aren't good. And that's what's also driving a lot of discontent in a lot of the sort of the blue Tory wall areas as well. So I think there's an opportunity to sort of strike at that. So
there's there's definitely a pushback because you get the impression that Mog and his cabal are very much neoliberal free traders. But what that does, and what we're seeing, is it yanks money and jobs out of the country. So you get a cheaper product, but you don't get your industry. And that's why you then need this sort of balance. And I always cite Kia. Kia is a great example where basically South Korea set up trade protections barriers for the car industry, built it up internally. And when it was ready, they released those barriers so foreign imports could go in. But it also meant that Kia imports went out. And we haven't done that. What we've done is just knocked out all the barriers. And we've just said, oh, it's free market. Everything's about the free market. It's like, well, if you're taking it in from areas that have lower work standards and their employees are cheaper, how do we compete with that? And what you could argue is we then go luxury goods. But that's a limited market. That's branding. And that could take 10, 20, 30 years unless you've got an influencer to be able to jack that up and sell it rapidly. So it's like we don't have that. And a lot of the businesses that we do have or could have luxury goods, they're not coming here. There was another business that's just disappeared. I think it's Grenadier have gone to Austria.
Yeah, you're looking at Revolut as well, a very, very big fintech company.
Do you want barriers to 60 million people or do you want barriers to 460 million people? And it's a simple choice because it'll be a cheaper cost to import into the UK. But the other thing you'll notice economically is that means money's going out of the UK. You want a higher amount of import than you want export. There are exceptions to that, but they're very few. And I'm just seeing us basically pump millions of pounds and billions of pounds in tariffs and tariff bills into the EU. We're a cash cow. The EU might just go, you know what? Keep them out because they're pumping money into our tariffs and our industries and giving us a tax revenue that we never had before. So I'm actually trying to contact the EU at the moment to go, how much money are you now making out of tariffs from the UK? I've got funny feelings about 50 billion that they've suddenly got an increased revenue of from all the tariffs, the paperwork, the taxes, the VAT. If they're making 50 billion a year out of us, that is a huge income increase. And they don't have to give it back. They don't have to invest in our infrastructure. They don't have to invest in anything to do with EU construction or legislation. And we're not there, complaining and moaning the entire time.
The more people like the free market fundamentalists like Morg and sort of the rest of them want to diverge, well, the more tariffs come in, the more those rise.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask then, why do you think the Brexiteers weren't there? I've heard some interesting arguments, but you'd think if there's an inquiry and Brexit is so perfect, they'd be there. So Max, what are your initial thoughts as to why?
Because I think it's because they're afraid, because they have nothing to show. Like, what have they to show on the other? Like, when it came to, and I've already forgotten his name, the guy who did turn up, he was talking about sovereignty. We got our sovereignty back. That was all he had. Like, there was no, they can't point to anything now. It's all about, well, in the future, we'll have these trade deals and we're going to get, and the economy will grow if we follow these rules, if we follow this path or whatever. But they can't actually point to something now. The problem is that on the other side, you can point to things now. You can say, look, the cost of importing and exporting has gone up. Businesses can't get access to the workers they need now. So there's no point talking about some benefit in the future if businesses and the people are suffering now. And that's why none of them turned up, because they know that it's different from the House of Commons, where if you're at like a select committee or at a hearing or an inquiry like this, you actually have to tell the truth. If you're in the House of Commons, you can just blah 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 and nothing happens. So I think a lot of them are actually afraid. Jacob Rees-Mogg wouldn't turn up because he has nothing to prove. He has no evidence, for any sort of benefit. He can say, yeah, well, in 50 years. But as soon as he's challenged on something now, how are people benefiting now? He has nothing. And I think that was it.
Peter?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, even if you take it down to Leeds for Europe street stalls that we do once a month in Leeds, pre-leaving the EU, we used to get leavers come up and argue with us and stuff. Now, they might mutter as they walk past, but they don't stop and argue. I think that is the issue. They cannot point to anything that's actually a benefit. And I think also, I think there was a certain amount of management going on the, the government didn't want a lot of MPs there, because picking up on what Ollie was saying earlier, I mean, we did a targeted mailing of MPs through the Brexit Inquiry campaign. So that was neutral. And we wrote to them, asked them to go. I mean, for example, one day I sent 30 emails to SNP members, because initially what we were concerned about getting somebody like Jacob Rees-Mogg or somebody along and just filibustering or them ramming it with Brexit supporters and filibustering. So we were trying to get a balance, and initially we wanted to make sure that there would be plenty of supporters there. So yeah, we had been writing to MPs, but yeah, I think you're right that there it is that they can't point to anything to say that this is an advantage, and a public inquiry they know would bring out a lot of the stuff that's going wrong, and that's why I think this petition and debate were important, because now what we've got on the parliamentary YouTube channel, you've got the film of the debate. You've got film there with MPs talking about the impact of Brexit. Hansard, it's transcribed the speeches word for word. They're now in the government vaults in perpetuity. So it was the first time we had people in the House of Parliament actually talking about the impact of Brexit. Also, before, the House of Commons Library wrote a briefing document which you can look at on the impact of Brexit, and it's very noticeable that it's quoting people like the CBI, the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, various people all talking about the downsides of Brexit, and the only people they can quote talking about upsides are the old Jessops and IEA and Sangar Sankar.
David Davis.
It's the same old suspects, and they're all the people they can find. So we've got it there in Parliament now. We've got it in writing. We've got it on film, and it's there now.
If you ever want to deal with Jacob Rees-Mogg, his kryptonite is Marina Purkiss.
You think you know better than the British people? I think you lied to people and they believed you. I think the British people are more intelligent than that. The British people weighed up Brexit. Are you telling me they should have known you were a liar?
Yeah.
Yes, I saw
that. It was interesting as well. You brought up the word collusion. Now that's a Trump term, which he used to deflect from the Russian report. But actually, legally, collusion has no meaning whatsoever. And technically, the civil service are meant to collude with government. That is their purpose. So it was interesting to see how they deflected from that. I'm going to ask one further point, and I'll get Ollie's view on this. I didn't feel there was much media interest. It was very, switch off, and you'd think this would be quite a big thing, Imagine GB News going, yeah, it's going to show all the benefits of Brexit. But of course, no. Obviously they're not a news agency, they're just entertainment. So maybe that's the reason why they didn't get invited. But did you have any impression from the media as to...
It's fair to say it wasn't amongst, if you like, the traditional broadsheets, but there was an article in the Daily Mirror before the debate publicising it. The Sunday Express actually contacted us and were demanding to know how we would answer the question, this is just a Ramona plot, which we gave them an answer, but they never ran the story. And afterwards, we got coverage. Caroline Lucas wrote in iNews. There was also on, I think it's Today in Parliament on Radio 4, that they covered it completely, and it was also on the BBC website. Since then, we were talking about Tobias Ellwood earlier. This week, he's written in the New European about the need for making the case for a public inquiry. So there has been, but not with the top-notch papers. And I think the problem we've got there is because, of course, well, who are the top-notch papers? Well, it's Daily Mail, Daily Express, the Times, the Telegraph. Well, they're all anti-Brexit. The only broadsheet you've really got is the Guardian, and unfortunately, we didn't get them interested. But I think that's an issue that we all have to face, in the rejoin movement, and it's something the European movement, for example, are trying to address to actually get us, in front of the wider media. I think Mike Galsworthy also went. He's the chair of European movement. He went on LBC just before the debate and was talking about it. So yeah, we did get some press interest, but not sort of the big hitters, if you like.
I think it's so important because it's a reference for people to point to, and that's something that it was before we had references, but they were all over the place, and now you have something like official in Parliament, and that's so important.
I can't wait to see another Russia inquiry, the second one that they've requested from the first inquiry, which clearly shows they interfered. I mean, it's shocking that that's happened, because you were talking about how you hadn't realised about the level of promotion that was taking place for leaving the EU. That in itself is massive. All you have to do is go and look at the US investigative reports through the US Senate, which was Republican owned at that point, and also the Mueller report, which is like FBI and CIA. And you go, I think estimates from Swansea University and Cardiff University suggested we had over 100,000 to 200,000 bots tweeting about leaving the EU. And it's always funny when you bring it up with leavers, they'll turn around and say, oh, you can't be influenced by that. It's like, are you telling me you know better than all advertising companies that have ever existed that actually advertising doesn't work? And of course, they've got no response to that. Ollie, what were your thoughts on the reason for the Brexiteers not turning up and the media response or lack of?
I just think to them, why? Like, if you put yourselves in the shoes of a Brexiteer for a second, why would you turn up to that? And the reason is you've got nothing really to show. You've got nothing to prove, because after all, you've got Brexit done. Remember, many of the conservative Brexiteers are currently standing on the platform. We got Brexit done. If you're a conservative up in the north at the moment and you're, on your hands and knees praying to Margaret Thatcher, please give me another term, you've got to go back to your constituents, potentially in a couple of months' time, maybe even next year. Who knows? Because, like I say, the last time the Tories had this bad luck election results, Theresa May was kicked out 3 weeks later. So, we'll see how long Rishi Sunak's got on this. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. What they've got to play. But if you are a Conservative MP and you are pro Brexit, your stance is, we got Brexit done. There's nothing wrong with Brexit. There's nothing to see here. Just ignore this. Giant mess I've got over here. I'm just gonna hide it underneath here for a second. But that's what they're really all about. And I know a lot of people get really annoyed with Labour's stance on this, because you don't really know electorally, even though there's polls saying this might happen when it comes to a general election. You don't know how that's really going to play out. And that is something we learned in 2017 from Theresa May. After all, that was meant to be the big Brexit election. Theresa May had massive polls saying that she would win a massive majority. But it didn't turn out to be the Brexit election. It turned out to be the pensioners' winter heating allowance election. And she lost her majority on that. And I think it's, how does the British public go into this? What's really the appetite for opening up this debate again? And I think at the moment, while that is building, I don't think it's quite there yet, but I think it's building a lot faster than I think a lot of people really initially realized, because I think I've said this before, the point where we are at now with this massive regret, I think a lot of people are expecting this maybe in 2030 for this to kick in. So I think we're a lot along the timeline than this happened before. I think it is right that they've got nothing to prove because they don't want to talk about Brexit anymore, because I think they themselves are fed up of talking about Brexit at one point, and I think they're terrified to reopen this can of worms, because even before you look at what was the question about are you pro or EU, really the underlying question below that was, are you pro or against regulations?
Yeah.
Because ultimately that was what kicked off Euroscepticism. Well, I don't like regulations, but I don't like the EU because they're the ones who are giving us these regulations. And the question of regulations is one that still hasn't been answered in the Tory party. Are we pro or anti-regulations?
Which is a nice segue into these 4,000 EU laws that are supposed to be gotten rid of, but now has been dropped. The plan to get rid of these laws. Once again, you had pressure from the adults in the room, businesses, the CBI, the OBR, trade unions. The EU itself was saying, we can't. It would be absolutely insane getting rid of these laws. Like when Jacob Rees-Mogg was asked about these laws, he resorted to the vacuum cleaner wattage one once again. Like this idea, you increase the wattage, you increase the power. No, it's about efficiency. It's about making things more efficient. This was what the EU is driving towards. But he'll just say this is, well, we want to have the ability to make more powerful vacuum cleaners. Yeah, but who are you going to sell them to? Yes. So once again, it's this idea that we just need to go down this road of ripping up regulations, ripping up laws, but not actually replacing them or knowing which ones to replace.
GB News came out last night and was suggesting, I think with Tom Harwood, claiming that the rumours he's hearing are that it's the civil servants again. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? The civil servants are saying it's too much work, which is probably true.
Yeah.
It's a good, it is a valid reason. Why would you go through and systematically just wipe it all out and press the reset button when actually some of those rules might be quite useful? Again, going on to Marina, she, at the end of her rant at MOG, her eloquent, calm rant at MOG, turned around and said at the very end, you want to bonfire workers' rights.
When Jacob talks about deregulation, that's a big thing. You're all about deregulation. What Jacob is talking about is scaling back your workers' rights and consumer rights.
I'm afraid we're going to have to draw this to a conclusion, but you're wrong on that because our employment rights all predate the European Union by and large.
But he then cut her off and didn't want to talk about that, it seemed. It suddenly was like, oh, we've got to go, bye. Don't want to talk about that. But he's been in Parliament and said it, hasn't he?
Something else I want to bring up about this, because it's not just about these regulations for things like workers' rights. This also technically covers rulings and who has supremacy in a lot of these rulings. Because if you, let's say you owned a business with a business partner who might be in Europe and you split, now this law comes in, who was right in your legal argument? Wow. If you've had a divorce and you've maybe one partner's in the EU, maybe one's in the UK, who got child rights? It reopens that entire question, because it completely upends which court had supremacy. So there's a ton of stuff in this bill which is just so awfully bad. It's not just about regulations. There's a whole stuff to do with the legal stuff that's going on in this area as well. So it's not just about the regulations. It opens up massive cans of worms for the whole legal ramifications for which court had supremacy, UK or the EU courts.
But isn't this once again a case of the tail wagging the dog, where you have, where did we come up with this? How did this happen? Wasn't it Liz Truss was suggesting it first to win the leadership, and then Rishi Sunak said, no, I'll do more. So she wanted to get rid of 2,000 laws. He said, I'll actually get rid of 4,000 laws. So it would, but why? In order to keep the supporters, the members of the party happy, the extreme within the Conservative Party.
This all comes back to the free market fundamentalists. Yeah. It all comes back to, they knew we can't get rid of every regulation. We cannot introduce a law to say we want to get rid of every single regulation on the books. They knew they can't do that. But if we go, let's introduce a law where we get rid of 2,000 laws, which, bear in mind, a lot of laws, it comes up for what laws you get rid of, where they get rid of from, and then where does this end up going? Because now in that bill as well, if there's other regulations that we didn't get rid of the first time, now there's all these mechanics in there that we can get rid of these other laws and regulations. And maybe we failed the first time, but now we can have another crack at it with these new rules and regulations. And if you want to try and save them, you've got to go through this labyrinthian process to try and save them. It's designed specifically to get rid of as many laws and regulations when they know they can't get rid of them all, but they can get rid of enough. And it gives them the abilities to get rid of more and more and more. It's the classic Brexiteer. It's never enough,
Can we,
we'll get rid of 800, not 200, 2,000. Oh no, that's not enough.
Can we bring in Peter here on this? What's your take on that, Peter?
It's interesting. I think it is the whole thing about Brexit. This just follows the whole lot, and that is it's ideological. It's that is EU bad, therefore get rid of it. But another thing I think where this comes to is kind of theory that I have. Because last year, if you look at my Twitter account, you'll see a pinned tweet there of the Daily Express calling me a Ramona, a photograph of me calling me a Ramona, because we had a protest, a small protest outside the first Tory leadership hustings in Leeds. Had an exchange with Andrea Jenkins, but the question was, when can we expect to see these Brexit benefits? Her reply was, "You're just a sore loser," and that was that. But also, I got into an exchange with Alec Shelbrooke, who's the MP for Elmiton somewhere. I can't remember, just on the outskirts of Leeds. And he said, "Right, I'll give you 4 Brexit benefits. The first one is the vaccine rollout." So this is in the queue getting it. I said, well, let me stop you there. I said, because the vaccine rollout, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine was authorised when we were still under EU rules. The director of the MHRA, June Rains, confirmed that it was authorised under EU rules. So leaving the EU had nothing to do with it. And he said to me, that's not true. Now, it is. And what that led me to think is, what is going on with some of these people is, they know they're right. Okay. And because they know they're right, it doesn't matter what they say to prove they're right. They don't have to prove they're right because they're right. So it doesn't matter what they say, even if it's wrong, because even if that bit's wrong, they're right. There's no way that they're wrong.
Do you have a job?
No, but don't people need good cars? Can't you sell good cars, Dad?
Listen, you little wiseacre. I'm smart, you're dumb. I'm big, you're little. I'm right, you're wrong. And there's nothing you can do about it.
And so getting rid of the EU rules, Rees-Mogg knows he's right. It's right to get rid of them because we're not in the EU, so we don't have EU rules. And you will not convince him that he's not right. And I think that's it's like the old bores in the pub or the golf club, depending on where you are on the social scale. You know, who sit there and spout this stuff, and you're never going to convince because they know they're right. And I think that's the same here. They know they're right. They don't need to justify it, so they'll say anything to justify it because they don't need to justify it because they're right, and that's all there is to it.
They've got the hymn book, and that's the one they're singing from.
Yeah.
That's interesting you bring up the hymn sheet, because we've got a religious ceremony that took place that the church didn't pay for, and we only got a quarter of an hour left. So I thought, let's bring up the coronation, as well as the right to protest, freedom of speech, right to assembly, right to religion, and free press. You know, all the things that are in the American Constitution and the First Amendment. The first change that they made that absolutely solid and clear. That at least those rights, everyone should have them. But over here, since the coronation or anything to do with the monarchy turns up, those rights are suppressed, at least on that day. But we can also turn around and say some of the stuff they brought in the past has led to other ramifications. So I think it's the Snoopers Charter. We're now aware that councils are using that, so which was anti-terrorist bill. Councils are using that to investigate people for not paying council tax. So it's not for terrorism, it's for that. We've got Stop and Search, which was terrorism bill, which is now being used to target minorities, and the police have openly said, yeah. And so members of parliament said, yeah, that's great. We don't care about that. And it looks like they've done the same as protest bill. I'm gonna go over to Peter. What are your initial thoughts on this, Peter?
On the protest bill, well, I mean, it's something that affects us greatly because, again, you know, I said I'm an activist. You know, the Rejoin movement, we use mass protests a lot. So it is a real concern. And I think the issue over what happened at the coronation is, okay, maybe that wasn't the best place to have it. Although, you know, when are you going to protest about the monarchy other than at a coronation? But, you know, it's a fundamental right, the right for peaceful process, and to arrest people on their way to a protest, because also under these new rules, you can be I've got to try and get this. You could be arrested on suspicion of going to cause a disturbance at or disruption at a protest if you've been involved in two protests previously, which have caused disruption. Now, I mean, I went on both the People's Vote marches. I went on the National Rejoin march. That causes disruption because they had to close roads. So I'm technically already there. You know, I fit that criteria of having attended two protests that were disruptive. So and so, you know, there's a lot of grey area around this, and I think this was part of the problem the police had. Is the law, I don't think, is probably specific enough. So they were acting on their interpretation of the law, and you know, in the end, they released people without pressing any charges and apologising.
And it was interesting. I'll just bring this in very quick. It was interesting considering everything that took place with Sarah Everard and the police failures to protect her. But they then, on the night before, were arresting people for giving out rape alarms, despite the fact that that might have been one of the things that could have potentially done something to protect all those women that had been attacked at night, including by the police. Isn't that interesting that they did that? Max, I can see you're very keen to get in. I'd love to also know, Max, what was the response to the coronation in Italy? Did anyone care or not?
Nobody cared.
No.
But it is interesting what Peter said about how the police were arresting people and then releasing them without charge. You know, why were you arresting them if you were then releasing them without charge? But it's also interesting if you look at who is being arrested. Like we've seen, for example, with the anti-lockdown protests or the low emission zone protests. None of these people are being arrested. They're causing disruption. But so it seems to be almost politically motivated, and
they're actually vandalizing stuff. We now know that they're actively going around smashing cameras.
But it does seem to be politically motivated, and it seems that it was Suella Braverman who was behind these arrests, because later on, you know, one thing is to arrest somebody and put them in prison. Another is to arrest them and release them without charge. It's just to disrupt the protest. It's about taking people off the street. But you know, I think it was George Carlin who said, you know, we don't have rights, we have temporary privileges. And and until there's a written constitution where you can say, this is my right. So if the police come to arrest you, or if you are facing a judge, you can say, look, here it is, I have the right to protest. But that doesn't exist at the moment. So we talk a lot about I have the right, but if it's not written down, it doesn't really mean anything.
Needs to be addressed, to be honest. Not having a written constitution certainly allowed Boris Johnson to get away with things like proroguing Parliament. Having a written constitution, having that type of stuff down is and would be a very, very big benefit when it comes to stuff like this.
It's been interesting to see that almost even journalists have been arrested on camera. There are clips of police saying, you start chanting, not my king, we'll have to arrest you.
Why can't we chant not my king?
It does escalate.
What do you mean by escalate?
As in, like, chanting gets louder and louder and it causes a public nuisance.
What do you mean by public nuisance?
Listen, I know what you're trying to do. Just let me
explain. Yeah, I'm trying to work out where my right of freedom of expression lies today. We are entitled...
You may be removed from the field.
For chanting not my king?
No, if you start causing public nuisance.
By chanting not my king?
Possibly.
So if we chant not my king on a public street today, we're going to be removed for public nuisance. Is that what you're saying? Maybe. Okay.
Possibly.
I'm sort of like, there was also another interesting clip, I'll see if I can dig it out for this, of the police threatening someone. If you keep shouting that out, not in this coronation, but I think during the Queen's death, if you keep shouting out, not my king, I'm going to arrest you. So the person, the agitator who was getting involved in this, then started shouting out how Prince Charles was best friends with Jimmy Savile, to which the police just looked really confused and didn't know what to do, because it's the truth. And therefore it's not a protest. And therefore, what do? Are they causing a disruption? Or are they just shouting out? And it's interesting as well, because I'll link that into the next point. The police can't investigate the monarchy. They've got sovereign immunity. They can't go on to Crown Estate because they have sovereign immunity. So that means there's no accountability for any actions, despite, and I'll be really blunt here, the family hanging out with two of the most prolific sex offenders in Western history. And yet, no investigation. The Met Police said there isn't enough evidence to investigate anything to do with Epstein in the UK. Yet Channel 4, about a month later, said, here's 17 witnesses that all claim they've been sexually assaulted by Epstein. Why are you not investigating? We've heard nothing. Absolutely nothing in regard to that. Why? Probably because it's connected to the royal family. If Andrew wanted to absolve himself completely of anything, he's got security records detailing what time and where he's been throughout all of this. It was a shame that Emily Matlis didn't say you're going to release those documents. LBC, I think Nick Ferrari interviewed the head of the Met at the time, and she said, no, we're not talking about that. We're not going to talk about those police records. So we've got this system where if they do anything wrong, we're still stuck with them, which is horrendous. I mean, that's no difference to Mussolini. That's no different to Franco. I'm not saying that they are doing the same actions, but my God, they've hung out with two of the most prolific Western sex offenders. So it's interesting to see that we're sort of stuck with them.
I think it's more a case of people say, oh, well, let's get rid of the monarchy. And I think that is probably a lot of what we've seen, especially from Republic, from the biggest sort of anti-monarchist groups we have in the sort of the UK. I'm not very sort of pro or anti-monarchy. I think I'm probably like most Britons. I don't really care, and I know that's sort of a shocking stance to say, but I don't really care either way about having or not having a monarchy. My stance on that has always been, there's bigger problems. If you get rid of the monarchy, it's not going to solve the cost of living crisis. It's not going to solve inflation. It's not going to solve the economy. There's bigger problems to take care of. If we get rid of them, great. I don't really care. I don't really care about the monarchy. But I don't really want them either, if that makes sense. But it's an odd situation. I think I'm probably falling into the most gap of that, because, like I say, I don't really care either way. I think the ideal thing would be to reduce the size of the monarchy, because we've seen them do that in Norway, the Netherlands, where they've sort of vastly shrunk the size of what that is. And I think you've seen in The Guardian recently, they've been having a lot of articles about sort of the wealth and about the Crown estate and the fact that all, how much taxes, the king now no longer pays and things like that. So there's a ton of stuff that, you could do, but the number one sort of critique was, oh, well, let's get rid of them. But I think there's larger problems in the UK that we sort of should be put in, to play at first. I think, again, rejoining the EU or rejoining the Single Market Customs Union, I think is a lot more better effort to put into than getting rid of the monarchy. But I do get the point, and I do see people's arguments, like you just said, the sovereign immunity, the whole thing sort of with Prince Andrew. There's a ton of sort of tax loopholes and all sorts of stuff that.
But there's also the corruption as well, because there have been reports of members of the royal family using their connections to government to help, like Saudi businessmen, for example, get certain privileges. So give a brown envelope to a member of the royal family, and then they lean on the government at the time to give this person a contract or to put them in the House of Lords or something like that. We saw,
exactly. Let's get rid of the House of Lords. That would be that is. If I've said before, is an absolutely amazing thing that we should sort of be looking at and doing as well, because I think that would have a very, very big, much bigger impact than just getting rid of the monarchy. That the monarchy isn't sort of responsible for, especially when it comes to sort of politics as well.
But I'd turn around and say those anti-protest laws, anti-freedom of speech laws, anti-religious laws, anti-press laws have all been put in place to affect every citizen apart from the monarchy. That set of laws has been put in place to protect one group and vilify everyone else, which can now be used as an excuse because of the monarchy. So I might turn around and say that. Peter, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the arrest of the protesters, I think, is a very, very dangerous precedent, and I think it fits in with things like the Rwanda deportations, with the whole enemy of the people, judges enemy of the people rhetoric. I've always been interested in history. I'm not a historian, but I've always been interested in history, and I remember as a young man sort of wondering, what happened in Germany to turn a perfectly normal people into the Nazis? What happened there? And also, what would I have done if I'd have been there? I honestly never thought I'd get the opportunity to find out, but that seems to be where we're headed.
There's a lot of similarities. I was talking before we came on about Franco. He's got the exact same bill name, which had the exact same reason. Mussolini, leggi fascismi. Hope my Italian's better than it was last week, Max. That's an it's the same sort of bill. I can arrest you under any circumstances. I don't need even suspicion, which is part of what the protest bill actually says. Certain police chiefs have discretion to pick people to arrest with no... I mean, that goes against habeas corpus. That would be our most codified constitution. We had a system where you're innocent until proven guilty. Now you're instantly guilty by association, which I don't see how that's very different to any of the... I mean, you were talking about Nazi Germany. It's crazy how people got swept up in that. But one of the key things was that their propaganda was so effective at the time. They just kept repeating the same message over and over again until people believed it. And in many ways, we could have a potential problem. If we ever go back into the EU, we could have a new thing of stab in the back. People suggesting that the reason why Brexit failed is because of the evil people that wanted to rejoin.
Yeah, it was those deadly remainers. There's evil remainers. But one thing I certainly always want to bring up is it does come down to political engagement. I mean, we've just had the local elections. We've seen the turnout numbers again. And the turnout numbers...
23%, was it?
Yeah, very, very low. Yeah. Very, very low. And I always make this case. I think I've made it every single time I've come onto the show. politics is not just a once every 4-year thing. It's something you should be always at least paying attention to. And your local politics, what goes on your council, your parish council, your in your town hall, is just as important as what goes on in Westminster. And that's why I always say, because you know what's coming, this book, Paint Your Town Red. Very, very good. I always recommend it whenever I'm on here because it is very, very good. It's how you can sort of bring a bit of socialism into your town. And like I say, 23%, you saw people getting elected on a turnout of just getting 300 votes. That's not a lot to get. That is really not a lot to get in some places. I mean, some cities, of course, you saw, in the thousands because you've got more. There's more volume for people voting. But depending on the size of your town, 23%. Well, that's only maybe a couple hundred people you've got to convince to vote for you. I
think it was at the last election, the last local elections, a Labour candidate lost because of 2 votes. Yeah. They lost by 2 votes. So yeah, we're still talking. Like if a few more people had turned up, they could have won it. So.
And that's why I'm very, very excited because I always do encourage tactical voting, but it has to be get the message out that this is what is going on. And I've always felt for the past couple of elections that messaging really hasn't been there. But it does seem this time the message got through that tactical voting is a thing. This is what you have to do. And because it has worked so well, as we've seen in a lot of these town councils, can it now transfer and will it play a very big part in the next general election? That is something I'm very, very eager to see because it does seem that if we can get the Tories out and we get in, a Labour government or we get in a Labour coalition, we can start to really tackle some of these problems. And this also goes into sort of political, activism. What Peter does. I think what Peter does in sort of what they do in Leeds and Europe with all the street stalls is absolutely fantastic. But we then see very, very little sort of political engagement in political parties, which I always find really, really depressing because if you join a political party, then you get to have a say on what goes on in your party, who your MP is, what policies you get to vote for. Just look at Labour for PR. Labour for PR was laughed at when it first started. You'll never get more than 200 Labour councillors to back your proposition that Labour should support PR. They've got the vast majority of Labour, local Labour parties to support PR now, and it got voted in at the Labour conference.
Wow.
It can happen. It can work. It takes a lot of work. I'm sure Peter will tell you as well, it takes a lot of work to do this, but it's worth it.
Can I just make one point on the local elections very, very quickly? The MP who was the only Tory MP to turn up at the Brexit debate, the one that Max is determined not to remember his name, Adam Holloway, his council was taken by Labour.
Yay!
Yay!
A Brexit benefit.
Yeah.
Just like to say thank you for that impassioned speech. Peter, thank you for all the work you've done for the inquiry. That's amazing. And I'm sorry to say we're out.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.